Welcome to the Self-Publishing Experience, the quarterly podcast about indie publishing from the team at Troubadour Publishing. Here are your hosts, Stephanie Carr and Jeremy Thompson.
Welcome to the fourth episode of the Self-Publishing Experience podcast, where the Troubadour team bring together industry insights, author conversations, and tips and tricks designed to help out anyone interested in self-publishing.
In this episode, we'll be looking at the crime genre and speaking to well-known crime fiction author Stephen Booth. We'll also speak to self-published author Stephen Collier, look at trends in crime cover design, and also look forward to the upcoming London Book Fair.
We started 2020 with some unexpected news from the world of crime writing. Lee Child is passing over his well-known leading character, Jack Reacher, to his brother. After admitting that he considered killing off the character, he decided to let him survive, giving his brother, Andrew Grant, the chance to continue Reacher's story for years to come. So we'll have to see how the fans react to the new author.
Well, I'm a fan actually, and a Jack Reacher book usually features in my holiday reading list, something not too serious to delve into on the plane or on the beach. I do find it interesting, however, that authors choose to deal with popular and long-lasting characters in fiction in different ways. I guess it's a fine balance between running out of steam with a character like Jack Reacher against the audience's appetite for more. Of course, you have no idea when creating the character exactly how enduring the character is going to prove to be.
Exactly. So where really is the best place to start when writing your crime novel? At a recent event in a slightly echoey hall, I caught up with Matador author Stephen Collier, author of Driving Dead, to find out where he gets his inspiration from. Driving Dead is a detective novel, but it's a little bit different from what we've come to expect from the detective genre. I know that Jake, your protagonist, is actually a traffic cop. Yes. who works on the case of a woman who's been killed in a road collision.
Yes.
You used to be a traffic police officer yourself.
I did, yeah.
How much did your experiences in that job influence your writing? And do you think that you would have written this story if you hadn't had that job yourself?
I looked across the whole of the crime genre, and there is always a downward like of the police traffic cop. Morse and Barnaby calls them wooden tops or knuckleheads or whatever, where that really is not the case. And I thought it was about time to redress the balance and say, well, actually, if you take a road death, the same processes are put in place as you would a murder. So although the officer that is examining the scene is a traffic policeman, he's actually a detective as well, because he has to use the same processes as investigating a murder.
Sounds like it was very important to you to show a different side to detective fiction by having a protagonist that didn't fit the description of the detectives and investigators that readers would usually expect.
Absolutely, and that I think is my driving force to make him something different.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about the cover, because it's one thing having a great book, but if it doesn't have a great cover, you're not going to sell. I must say that the cover of your book, it really draws the eye. I wondered, what kind of cover did you envisage initially for your book, and how did the process work from your initial vision for the cover to what we've ended up with?
I've got a vision of a skeleton driving a car, basically. And they came up with this picture that I now have, and I thought, that's really good. It is, as you quite rightly point out, very eye-catching. It's bright red. It's got a little car on it, and it actually does the job. I
find that it's quite a simple cover in many respects,
yes.
But a lot of the time, a cover doesn't have to tell the whole story.
Yes, and a lot of people have said to me how good the cover is, and how did you design it? Well, it's nothing to do with me. Actually, I left it to my publisher.
Now, you actually have a master's degree in crime fiction writing, so I'm guessing this came in quite useful when writing the book. But what was your experience with doing a course like this, and is it something that you would recommend to other authors looking to develop their writing skills?
The short answer is I would recommend the course to them. It was extremely enlightening. However, I'd written Driving Dead before I started the course.
Had you?
Yes.
Did doing the course make you think you may have done any parts of the book differently, or did it kind of just inspire you for any future books that you might write?
Really, it opened up so much information that I hadn't even thought about when I was writing. So what did I do? I went back to Driving Dead and I tweaked it a little bit in relation to the new information that I've been taught.
So it sounds like you're always kind of developing and learning as a writer, even after your book's been published.
Yes, yeah, absolutely right. I don't think you can ever not learn anything more about writing. I think if you speak to any of the writers, and the good thing about the UEA course was, I got to meet and talk at length with people like Val McDermid, Lee Child, Ian Rankin. We spoke with these people in masterclasses, but there was also some socialising as well afterwards, and in a way that was more enlightening than the masterclass that they did, because they relaxed a little bit.
Learning from the best.
Absolutely right, and it was really good.
I really like how Stephen's used his experiences from his career to influence the story. It's allowed him to create a fictional world which is believable while being able to create the sense of intrigue. And interestingly, Stephen also mentions that he got to meet Lee Child, and we've already touched upon his famous character Jack Reacher this morning.
Stephen mentioned the cover and how what he originally had planned didn't end up being the direction that he went with. Our senior designer, Jack Wedgbury, talks now about how this cover came about and how trends in crime covers are constantly changing and evolving.
Knowing your genre is an important part of creating a book cover. Understanding what is popular with readers and retailers within different genres can help with the direction of the design. For example, when browsing a bookshop, if a reader is specifically looking for a crime thriller, then it helps if they are able to easily recognise the genre at first glance. In the case of contemporary crime, as with any genre, there are always key trends to look out for. For example, crime books will tend to have an ominous or mysterious tone, utilising things such as darkness and shadow, distressed textures, and often bold sans serif fonts. I worked with Stephen on the cover for Driving Dead, and as he mentioned, we felt that we could take his idea in a more commercial direction. As a self-publishing author, when working with a designer, it's always worthwhile giving them a cover brief or a jumping off point, but then allowing them some leeway to play around with ideas, and perhaps create something that you weren't initially expecting. At Matador, we'll always try and create something that we feel can sit on bookshelves amongst traditionally published books, and not look out of place. In this instance, I think we've created something that both the author and ourselves are really happy with, and that's had a positive reaction from readers too. The cover image itself is a bird's eye view of a car driving on a forest road. Use of photographic imagery is something that's quite popular in crime and thriller books in today's market, in comparison to, say, young adult, which is predominantly illustrated. In crime fiction, imagery of landscapes such as this is something that you'll often notice, along with portraits of faces and silhouetted figures. As Steph mentioned, we chose a fairly simple image which hints at the story. In this way, we hope to intrigue potential readers, whilst not overcomplicating the design, which is something that can often trip up those new to self-publishing. The best advice I can give is to try not to give too much away. Choose one or two elements from a story to work with. In cover design, less is often more. Remember, it's about selling the book. The cover is there to catch a potential reader's eye, not to retell the entire story. Where the imagery is more abstract, you'll often notice a short tagline that gives the reader an insight into the story. In the case of Stephen's book, he'd already come up with one that worked well. When coming up with a tagline yourself, try to keep it snappy. It should entice the reader into checking out the blurb. In terms of the colour palette, for Stephen's book we added a bright red overlay to the image, with the exception of the car in white to draw the eye. You'll often see crime and thriller books utilising a simple colour palette of black, white and one feature colour that really stands out. In this case, we chose red, which gives the cover a foreboding presence, adding a sense of danger and drama, whilst capturing a potential reader's attention.
So looking forward to the future, there's a big event happening in March for the publishing world, the London Book Fair. This is the go-to event for publishers from across the world to meet up and see what everyone else is doing. We'll be there for the 15th year in a row and on our stand, all with our latest books, and our stand is 2C70.
It's a really great opportunity to visit different workshops and find out what new opportunities are opening up in the publishing industry, and for staff to meet contacts from other companies face to face. I've already got meetings set up with Kobo and NetGalley to see what new marketing and merchandising prospects we can take part in.
Our Operations Director Jane Rowland and Marketing and Sales Manager Jonathan White give us an insight into what authors can expect from the event.
I'm here with Jonathan White and we are talking about London Book Fair. Now this year will be my 15th year there, but I think you can beat me on that, can't you?
Yes, I rather can. I started going there in the 1980s, I'm slightly embarrassed to say. So I think I've seen quite a lot of years of that, and it must be over 30 years since I first went there.
And how has it changed?
Well, there are quite big changes. There's a lot of things that haven't changed, which is really good. It is still a fantastic time and place for the publishing world and the bookselling world to get together and to understand what each other's doing and to generally speak to each other. The big difference I've really found is when I first started, there were buyers who would come and make meetings at publishers' stands because they were actually wanted to place orders for the next 3, 4, 6 months worth of books, and they wanted to see those books. Of course, that's all changed. It's really the way that the computerization of the industry has happened. That doesn't really happen anymore. It's more of a rights fair for placing orders, and some foreign customers are still coming to place orders. But for the rest of us, it's really a time to look at the business we're doing and talk to our main suppliers and customers.
I mean, when I went 15 years ago for the first time, there were no self-publishing companies there at all. It wasn't about the author, it was about the publishers. And so it's more recently that we've seen a change where authors are much more welcome to come. And certainly when we go on our stand, we meet a lot of authors, potential and future and current authors as well. And there's also a lot of seminars and talks which are now aimed at authors. And certainly 15 years ago, there was none of that at all.
Yes, I think it is how it has really changed now and become much more open to that side of the business and an understanding that authors are working quite independently, certainly of publishers these days, with the rise of internet publishing and self-publishing, of course, as well, that they are going to be there and they're going to be wanting to talk to the people who are important in the business and really to make use of that time when everyone's in one place at one time.
So what would your top tips be for authors attending the book fair for the first time this year?
I think you've got to plan if you possibly can. It's very difficult and it can be quite dispiriting if you don't really know quite what you're wanting to achieve. It is a really good time to see what publishers are doing and to look at stands. But those publishers and quite often the other people who are there have made appointments and are keen to see people who they already know about are going to be seeing them. It's not a good time to try and just drop in on the stand and hope to speak to someone. But as long as you have a plan and you know what you want to achieve from it, there's a fabulous amount of information you can get there and it can be a really productive time. But do that homework first to see what you're doing.
I would agree with that. I think it's don't expect to walk onto the big publisher stands and walk away with a publishing contract. It's not that kind of event. But to learn what's going on in the industry, I think it's really worth authors going.
Yeah, I think you can find so much about what publishing is about at the moment, what the booksellers are after at the moment. It's a really good place for doing research and for understanding the book industry. Everyone's in one place at one time. It's one of the 3 really big book fairs in the calendar that's taking place, and people are coming from all over the world to see what's going on, and the UK book industry is there in complete force, so it's a really good time to see what's happening and to get ideas for your books and for your projects.
We'll be on stand number 2C70 and it takes place in London Olympia between the 10th and 12th of March this year.
And now for some news from the publishing world.
For the 3rd year in a row, the number of independent bookshops in the UK has grown from 883 in 2018 to 890 in 2019, according to the Booksellers Association. Not an enormous growth, but it's still growth. This is really positive news for the book community, as it means there's still a demand for traditional bricks and mortar bookshops. It also increases the opportunities for self-published authors to get their books stocked on shelves. Merrill Halls, the director of the Booksellers Association, is the keynote speaker at the 2020 SelfPublishing Conference as well, so it's a great opportunity to hear more about what independent bookshops are looking for.
And the top publishers in 2019 have also been announced, with no surprises, Penguin Random House taking the top spot. However, this wasn't the biggest growing publisher of 2019. That accolade actually goes to Pan Macmillan, who saw an amazing 25% growth. Part of this success was due to their bestseller, Pinch of Nom, which sold more than 200,000 copies in its first 3 days on sale.
And another date for your diary is World Book Day this year on the 5th of March. This annual event aims to encourage children to pick up a book, and more than 15 million £1 book tokens will be given to school children across the UK, allowing them money off their new read.
Planning for the future in any industry is vital, so predicting which direction the publishing community will move in is something that we take very seriously here at Troubadour. Jane has put together her predictions for 2020.
My first prediction for publishing in 2020 will be that audio will continue to be a big growth area. It was huge in 2019 and it's not going to slow down in 2020. Audiobooks are phenomenally popular at the moment, particularly with the under 45s, where 55% of listeners are in that age bracket. An area that I think we'll see growing within the audiobook sector is devices like Alexa, where people can listen on those a lot more. And this, I think, will lead to a growth in uninterrupted listening, where users want to switch seamlessly between the ebook, the physical book, and the audiobook, rather than being tied to a particular format. They'll want to have a format that suits them at that particular moment and their particular location. And I think publishers are going to have to think about multi-formats and multi-format usage in a different way. Sustainability is going to be another big area in publishing. It's in the news already for every other industry. Publishing is going to be no exception to that. Publishing in itself can be an inherently resource-heavy industry in terms of making the books. So there's a lot within that industry that I think needs to be looked at and will be looked at this year. There's also the issue that unsold books at the end of their life are very often pulped. So the publishing industry has some questions to answer, and I think individual indie authors are going to think about that in terms of their own publishing. Are they making the right choices? Can they also look at their packaging materials when they're shipping books out to their customers? So that will be a big thing this year. I think we'll see a lot of authors writing about these issues, not necessarily from a non-fiction perspective, but also from a fiction and children's perspective. The environment will be very much more of a theme. At the end of 2019, the backlist had a resurgence. The backlist sort of refers to books that have been out for a year or more, rather than your front list, which is your new books. Strong backlist titles will always sell, but quite a lot fall into backlist and never do very much. The fact there's been a 4% increase in sales last figures is quite encouraging, and actually very encouraging for indie authors who very often will have a small splash they can make with their new title, their front list book, but actually backlist sales is what's going to be the bread and butter of what they do, and they sell as a writer. Obviously with backlist resurgence, it's great of course, but it brings the perennial problem of discoverability back into play. The more books there are out there, the harder it is to get discovered. So discoverability and backlist kind of will go hand in hand with that, and the question will be, how do you make a reader find your book versus many of the others that are there? It's something that indie authors, and in fact all publishers, battle with. Lots of talk last year about artificial intelligence and using AI and automated systems and machine learning to be able to remove some of the tedious tasks from the publishing process. We're not there yet, but it's something that will remain on the agenda. Publishers obviously want to remove the admin heavy burdensome tasks so that they can produce books more cost effectively without taking away the creativity. We're some way off seeing this come into play, but I think it's an interesting thing that will change. Without question, technology will keep developing as it has always done in publishing, and that will bring new opportunities for authors and publishers alike.
At Troubadour, we're also excited to announce that we'll be running the Self-Publishing Conference again in Leicester for the 8th year in a row. We'll be running sessions on things from typesetting to cover design, editing your manuscript to getting reviews, and creating digital products to writing for TV and radio. The conference is on the 25th of April and registration is now open.
It really is a brilliant day full of so much useful information. I found last year's conference so interesting, and I can't wait to hear from best-selling author Sophie Hannah this time around. Cressida Downing, who is running the Importance of Editing session, came to the conference last year, and this is what she had to say when asked why she felt it was so important for authors to attend.
I think they're great, and there's a few reasons. One is that it's really nice to meet other authors who are in the same boat. Writing is a very solitary experience, and although social media helps with that to some extent, just sitting down to another author, chatting to them and going, Do you have that block at chapter 4? Yeah, me too. You know, it's valuable. It's really valuable. Ideas spark off people. So that's just about being in a community with authors. But in terms of what the Self-Publishing Conference offers, it offers really practical advice all through the day and some bigger pictures about what the world of publishing is doing. And I've never seen anyone come away from it without some information that they found helpful.
One of our other speakers last year was crime writer Stephen Booth, who was an author on our author panel. Stephen's the author of numerous titles, both traditionally published and self-published. Jane caught up with Stephen at the conference.
I write a series of crime novels which are all set in and around the Peak District, featuring 2 Derbyshire police detectives called Ben Cooper and Diane Fry. And it's a long series. There are now 18 books in the series.
So tell me about the first book and how it got published.
The first one was called Black Dog, which I wrote 20 years ago now, actually. And I did have an agent, fortunately, at that time, so I was very lucky, and we actually had 3 publishers bidding against each other to buy that book, and that literally changed my life.
The books are set in the Peak District. How important is it for you to have a sense of place?
In my books, certainly the setting is very, very important. So I use a different part of the area for each book to give it a different atmosphere, a different feeling for each novel. And I know it's extremely important for readers, and a lot of my readers will go out and try to find every single location that I've mentioned in the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it is so important for readers.
So you've got real locations, also some made-up ones, I think.
Yes, that's right. And the relationship between reality and fiction can be quite complicated. So when readers go out into the Peak District, they can find all the real locations, but they'll also try very hard to try and find the fictional ones from clues in the book.
I think you've got quite a big following in America, haven't you?
Yes, the books have done very well. I was really surprised, actually, when the books took off in America. The first 2 both won awards for Best British Crime Novel of the Year in America. I had no idea there was a market for very British crime novels. In fact, the books are published in, I think it was translations in 16 languages around the world, including Russian and Japanese.
What is the difference when you're writing a book in the series and when you're writing a standalone book?
When I start a new book in the series, I'm starting from quite a solid basis in that I have my 2 protagonists, Ben Cooper and Diane Fry. They're already established, so I know them very well. I'm not starting from scratch. I feel that gives me a really solid grounding to start from, and my imagination can go off in any direction. But after 18 books, I have to say, it does get a little bit harder. I do sort of worry quite a bit. I might have written this before. Did I do this in 10 books ago?
You've got the traditional publishing contract for the Cooper and Fry books, but you also, I think, do some self-publishing as well.
I've self-published, in fact, 14 titles at various times and for various markets, and some of them are the Cooper and Fry novels, actually.
Quite a high percentage of crime fiction is now read by female readers. Have you had to change how you write your book?
I was writing for female readers right from the beginning, I think. And one of the reasons for that is that the novels that I read myself, fan of crime fiction, they were all written by women. I wrote the sort of book that I would have enjoyed reading myself. And I can remember my agent, when she read it, said, "This feels like a book that would have been written by a woman." Because I was writing about those issues that women tend to write about, character and relationships. You don't get shootouts and car chases in my books. That's not what they're about.
What would your top tips be for crime writers?
What I find very often is that aspiring crime novelists worry about the plot. They think they've got to get a clever plot. And I think they're worrying about the wrong thing. I think you should try and get your characters right first. If you get those characters who work and are interesting for readers, let the characters drive the plot rather than the other way around.
So as a former journalist, did you cover stories that gave you ideas for your crime writing?
Yes, I worked on local newspapers. That was a great experience because you have to do everything. I met a lot of police officers during my time as a journalist, which was very useful for me. And I covered court, for example. I sat in courtrooms for hour after hour watching the criminal justice system, which is an eye-opener in itself.
Do you think that anybody looking to write crime fiction should actually make a point of going to courts and listening to what happens?
If they can do, yes. I mean, if you want to get it right, it doesn't work the way you imagine.
I imagine that actually writing crime is a great way to access the whole human nature and the psychology of humans, which is a very complex area.
It is, and writing about murder, and I do a lot of events up and down the country and have done for years now, talking about murder, the psychology of murder. And it's fascinating the stories I get out of people who tell me about what they've thought of doing. Quite scary, the stories I get out of people sometimes. And I think one of the reasons that readers love crime fiction so much is that most of us are aware of that little dark corner of our own psyches where we can imagine ourselves in those circumstances. And when you're reading a crime novel, you're working those feelings through by reading about how other people deal with those circumstances. So you're doing it in a safe way. Very therapeutic, psychologically, quite a healthy thing to do, to read crime fiction.
You can find out more information about the Self-Publishing Conference at selfpublishingconference.org.uk.
And that's the end of this episode of the Self-Publishing Experience podcast. Join us next time when we'll be looking at the historical fiction genre and how important an edit can be before you publish. Bye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Experience. Learn more about indie and self-publishing at our website, troubadour.co.uk.